Welcome again to Feminist Friday, and thanks for coming despite the rain. I'm grateful. Like I say every time, that this is a little initiative by us to make feminist concepts and texts and theories available to people from all sorts of academic backgrounds. And we mainly focus on the discussions part. That's how, like I say every time, our idea is that we learn through our peers more. It's not through text, but through engaging with each other. I feel is the beauty of the thing that we're trying to do. We get to learn so much from you all. I'm really grateful. That's why I say this every time. I am so enriched by the end of the session that you guys bring such wonderful ideas each and every time in each and every session. That's really beautiful. Okay, I'm doing my MPhil for, nobody's new here, but still I'm saying it again. I'm doing my MPhil from CWS, and this is, he's doing this Shri, he's doing his PhD from CWS. He had been absent all this while, so he's back, finally. Today's topic, I thought, I remember last time also when I discussing Thoras, I think he brought in some point about how science is interpreted through social culture. So I thought that'd be interesting. We also had access to some interesting readings. Another reading which जो बात में बहुत बार आ चुके हैं, mentioned multiple times, when people had doubts regarding the difference between sex and gender and what we understand as sex, what are the sexes that exist beyond our understanding of just male and female. So we brought both of these readings under the common theme where we can say the egg and the sperm reading, we can say it's primarily about how culture determines how we see and understand science. General idea यही है कि science is something opposite to society. Science मतलब they are like polar opposite things. Science is the absolute truth, and society पढ़ाई में भी सोचोगे तो social science is something which is subjective, which we मतलब vary करते हैं ऐसा. But here the author is questioning that कि science is objective truth. Is it? Not really. How we interpret what we discover in science is very much determined by our understanding of society and the social structures that we have. The other reading, which is not exactly a feminist critique of science, but it brings in the topic that how medical interventions continuously help in forming our ideas in society. इसमें भी the Fausto-Sterling reading में how medically it's determined that मतलब individual के level पे भी how one person is going to, what identity that person is going to get, how that person is going to live his or her life. Medicine or science has such a big role to play. And I was also thinking, if you guys were present in the feminist keywords वाला reading, उसमें भी we saw when we were thinking of reading about how certain terms develop through ages, how certain terms got their meaning is very much through the medical field, the scientific field. Like say heterosexuality was defined a certain way, उससे वो society में एक मतलब उसका आया, it developed, it changed through time, through periods. So my primary point is that this relationship between science and society is actually very crucial. Both influence each other. We cannot keep those things separate. We cannot see that because we are studying social sciences, we are dealing with trying to understand social structures. Science is something separate. We can never do that. That would be foolish to maintain that binding. So yeah, with that intro, I'll start with the egg and the sperm reading. It's a big reading, but I think the primary point is एक ही point पे बात दोहरा है, so I'll sum that up, and then he will talk about the Fausto-Sterling reading. Okay. So this reading talks about, the name points out directly to what is it about. The name of the article is The Egg and the Sperm, how science has constructed a romance based on stereotypical male-female roles. romance is not like romantic stories, but romance as this fantastical idea of how we understand things. उसका पहला line जो है, it very well sums up what the article tried to do. She says that as an anthropologist, I am intrigued by the possibility that culture shapes how biological scientists describe what they discover about the natural world. So you get it. So we discover something, ठीक है, but how we're going to describe it, how scientists are going to describe it, is determined how the society functions, the culture that exists in society. तो उसमें भी so ऐसा देखा जाता है, like I'll just give a brief and then we'll go into details, like how this female biological process and male biological process, इधर में they are particularly talking about reproductive organs and reproductive processes. That's उसमें भी the way they described, उसमें somehow the male biological processes are getting a preference and they're being projected as somehow being better and more amazing than the female biological process, which because she breaks it down, we also take all of these ideas as such a given कि हाँ ऐसा ही तो है, wow this is how happens, like say basic idea लोगों के मन में रहेगा, people who know about how the basic thing about how the sperm goes and approaches the egg. Normally people would have a fantastic idea about this ki, yeah, this is what happens, it's a man who approaches the woman and the woman it says yes, and ऐसा ही हमारा दिमाग में thought रहता है, we never question it, but when the author, we can see when the author questions it and breaks open the ideas how it's actually makes no sense, but it's just a way of projecting our already prevalent ideas about how things function in society. So वही है, yeah. हाँ तो so the basic thing that she's talking about here is like we need to look into two certain processes. It's like how actually first she talks about the production of the egg. So the basic difference between the male and female production of eggs and the basic idea about the both of the reproductive processes is that when the female is already in the fetus of the mother, she's already born with a certain number of eggs, but with time वो धीरे-धीरे कम हो जाता है. So by in her reproductive phase, say when she's menstruating, she has around 400 to 500 eggs, which is a far less number compared to the number of sperms in a man's body. And sperm is produced throughout the lifetime of a man, but the egg is produced वो मतलब पैदा होके इसमें आता है someone outside. Yeah. So the so sperm is produced through.
Just give some space.
So the sperm is produced throughout the lifetime of the man, but that does not happen in females. And तो उससे related जो भी जुड़ा हुआ जो रहता है, like say when women menstruate, so she sheds the eggs which are not used. When they're अभी ऐसा देखा जा रहा है, when they're being described, the description implies that if something is going to waste, that the way the female body functions is such a waste. The eggs are not being used. मतलब the primary point of everything is making a baby, they're not being used and it's going a waste, so wasteful, scrap ऐसा. But when it comes to describing the sperm, like she writes it very funnily, this although the menstruation is seen as a failed production, but at the same time it employs the scientists employ a breathless prose when it describes the maturation of sperm. So it talks about how it's such a wonderful process that the sperm, so many millions of sperms are produced each day. तब इसमें मज़ा मतलब funny बात ये है कि okay, say considering a person, a couple can produce 10 to 15 max that's not the point of it. Certain amount of, if nobody is going to produce 400 to 500 babies, considering the female has that many eggs. तो उस हिसाब से if you compare, the eggs are less wasted than the million of sperms that's wasted every day. But उस नजर से देखा नहीं जा रहा है. When they're writing it, they're like saying कि the eggs are such a waste, menstruation is such a waste. But the sperms, wow, how magical! So many sperms are produced in a single day. It's so wonderful. That's the fun part. When the author is questioning that, हमें दिख रहा है, अच्छा, yeah, exactly. But this is how we do not think of it that way. Yeah. So वही कि like in an adult, मतलब ऐसे ही लिखा जाता है, in an adult male, this structures produce millions of sperm cells each day. How is this feat accomplished? None of these texts express so much enthusiasm for any female processes. So why is this happening? She is saying in one simple sentence, that's because the sperm does something that the menstruation does not, or the male reproductive process does something that female reproductive system does not, is the production of something deemed valuable. So the sperm is the valuable thing here. The egg is not so much. So wait, there are, related to this only, there are other kinds of ways of looking at it, like as if the ova is like just sitting there and degenerating with time. It's just going old, but the sperm is like always regenerating throughout the year. But the main point वही है. So the general idea is a party. The general idea जो लोगों के दिमाग में आएगा is like it is still a mystery. Why? And I think no, some scientific authors write this, like it is still a mystery why so many eggs are formed only to die in the ovaries. मतलब if how the woman is born with so many eggs, but with age that dies out. But the author of this article says that the real mystery is why the male's vast production of sperm is not seen as waste, which I already mentioned. This is why she is saying. Assuming that a man produces 100 million sperms a day during an average reproductive life of 60 years, he would produce well over 2 trillion sperm in his lifetime. Assuming that a woman ripens 1 egg per lunar month or 13 per year over the course of a 40-year reproductive life, she would total 500 eggs in her lifetime. But the word waste, he is wasting, implies an excess, too much produced. So for that she wastes only around, maybe for a woman wastes around only 200 eggs. For every baby a man produces, he wastes more than 1 trillion sperm. So how is it that positive images are denied to the bodies of women? This is like hypocritical, this makes no sense. अच्छा ये हो गया एक बार. So now another funny thing starts is how this process of how the sperm goes and reaches egg, उसमें भी the scientists are attaching typical social understanding of masculinity and femininity. So so one scientist writes, and this I'll read it out. It's the scientist likens the egg's role to that of sleeping beauty, a dormant bride awaiting her mate's magic kiss, which instills the spirit that brings her to life. Sperm, by contrast, have a mission, which is to move through the female genital tract in quest of the ova. So did you get it? Like ऐसे ही दिखा जा रहा है as if it's a romantic, fantastic story. The egg is like a bride who is lying down there, waiting to be saved by the magic kiss of the sperm. And the sperm is like a prince who is coming and doing the task and rescuing the egg. These are actually so unnecessary. It makes no sense. If you're supposed to look at science with such objective eyes, it makes no sense. The wording stresses the fragility and dependency of the egg, even though the same text acknowledges elsewhere that the sperm also lives for only a few hours. So, धीरे-धीरे this also comes up when newer research has been done, and थोड़ा-थोड़ा like लोगों का दिमाग खुला with time. actually like their roles are quite similar and quite interdependent. It's not like the sperm is the only one which is active and the egg is just lying down there. The egg also has a similarly an active role to play. So with new research, हाँ, so अभी तक क्या ऐसा होता है कि the sperm are described as penetrating the egg and specific substances on sperm's head are described as binding to the egg. Recently, this description of events was rewritten in a biophysics lab in Johns Hopkins University, transforming the egg from the passive to the active party. अभी तक जैसे हो रहा है कि egg is very passive, it just receives the sperm and sperm is the one who does the work, but that is being challenged with new research. So they discovered, this new research discovered with great surprise that the forward thrust of the sperm is extremely weak. हाँ, उसके पहले बीच में ऐसा होता है कि what happens, that was thought till now, the sperm has this forward thrust and it's like through the physical force it breaks down the egg का जो layering है. But let us describe that it's not the physical force that breaks it down, but there's also chemical, the sperm releases some sort of chemicals which chemically breaks it down. But the way it thrusts, like how it has been imagined all this while, is actually quite weak. So the way it has been imagined, like the sperm ऐसा पूरा jump करने के लिए ऐसा भाग के आ रहा है, it's not actually that accurate. So which contradicts the assumption that sperm are forceful penetrators. So it turns out that sperms are not that forceful penetrators, जैसा अभी तक समझ में आया था. But what happens actually, the surface, egg का भी जो surface है, it plays a very important role which prevents the escape of the sperm. It has kind of a sticky layer which like उसको पकड़ लेता है. So the egg is also in a way playing an active role. The egg traps the sperm and adheres to it so tightly that the sperm's head is forced to lie. Yeah. Can sit down also if there's nothing. Here.
Sit on the table.
Okay. So the egg traps the sperm and adheres to it so tightly that the sperm's head is forced to lie flat against the surface of the zona. The trapped sperm continues to wiggle ineffectually from side to side. So मतलब अभी हमको अगर सोचना पड़ेगा तो the way if we have to bring into this image of the sperm, like इसमें लिखा नहीं but I am saying we can just think automatically thought आएगा कि then you have to describe it as according to culture, then you would say कि अरे sperm is like a weak man, it does nothing, it is being held by this woman the egg. But nobody is describing it that way. By the previous descriptions, the logic, it should be how it's done. But although this new discoveries were met, but as usual, the previous cultural expectations were still being imposed. So what the only difference that happened in the recent writings and descriptions of this new discovery is that they continue to write papers and abstracts as if the sperm were the active party who attacks, binds, penetrates and enters the egg. हाँ, ये पहले होता था. But the only difference in these new descriptions were that the sperm were now seen as performing these actions weakly. So the sperm is still seen as the active agent, just that it does its job weakly. Like it's still the man. So that's how it is. So again with time, this thought process also changes. धीरे धीरे it's more discovered that the egg actually plays a very active role. And descriptions maybe these images do grant that these new images do grant the egg an active role, but at the cost of appearing disturbingly aggressive. So मतलब even when this cultural impositions of these prior works were being broken, new problematic thought or new problematic ideas about how a female is was being projected. So how do we connect it? Like so when a woman is powerful, the same action when a man does, we say he is powerful, but the same action when a woman does, we say she is aggressive. उसी चीज वही चीज is being imposed here as well. So by the end of the article, the author suggests that how can we change the way of looking at it. She suggests bringing in a cybernetic model, which she believes has a potential to shift our imagery from the negative, in which the female reproductive system is castigated both for not producing eggs after birth and for producing and thus wasting too many eggs overall, to something more positive. But even bringing in that model could also have some problems of its own. She's obviously warning of that. But she suggests, give an idea ki how we can look at things differently. She says that the female reproductive system could be seen as responding to the environment, bracket में pregnancy or menopause, like what's happening to her body, adjusting to monthly changes like menstruation, and flexibly changing from reproductivity after puberty to non-reproductivity later in life. So we could actually, if we wanted to, we could look at it that way कि female reproductive system is more oriented towards its environment. It's actually more logical in how it functions. It's just a matter of looking. So that's her suggestion. And why this article is important, and why how scientists describe this scientific phenomenon is important. She says that the models that biologists use to describe their data can have important social effects. That, like I said in the beginning, and we have even discussed about it in the initial sessions, like how the terms and the medical intervention and scientific interventions always affect the society. Here she is using the example of during the 19th century, the social and natural sciences strongly influenced each other. Here she talks about the example of Darwin. The social ideas of Malthus about how to avoid the natural increase of the poor inspired Darwin's Origin of Species. Once the origin, like the book Origin of Species, stood as a description of the natural world, complete with competition and market struggles, it could be re-imported into social science as social Darwinism. So it's being, the scientific ideas are being absorbed into social sciences as well, in order to justify the social order of the time. So what we're seeing now is also similar. The importation of cultural ideas about passive females and heroic males into the personalities of gametes. So like they're giving a certain kind of, in describing this reproductive processes, they're giving a certain kind of personhood to very biological cells, like another thing that comes in here, she is not very clear about it, but I'll add it. She says that someone points out that through visual representations such as sonograms, we are given images of younger and tinier fetuses being saved. So what happens, like we know in real life, it's not applicable in India abhi tak, thankfully, but you must be aware of debates in the US about abortion. So what we learn from here is actually there's a very important role how this fetus is being seen as a person. The fetus is actually not. Until a certain stage, it cannot feel or see anything. But with sonograms, and because of the scientific intervention that we can see from a very early stage in life, see it as some human being growing inside you, how it affects is abortion becomes problematic in real life, in real lives of people in the society. So that is what we have to also be cautious about, how we make these interpretations of, bring in these interpretations of science, and how we use technological interventions in our life. Yeah. So by that we come to the end of the article. Lastly, she ends it with saying that we need to be aware of the metaphors that are being used, and we need to be aware when we project cultural imagery onto what we study. Then we will improve our ability to investigate and understand nature. We need to, this is a sort of bias, and we need to remove that bias. By becoming aware of the implications of such metaphors being used, will rob them of their power to naturalize our social conventions about gender. So through this also, we, in a way, the scientists also naturalize the social ideas about gender. So we need to recognize those things and get out of it, so that we can understand nature better from an unbiased perspective. So that's that. And do you want to comment anything before we first jump onto the other reading? Or do you want to do that later? Is there anything to say? Yeah, you can ask them because sometimes we have it.
So if you have any thoughts or any comment on this reading? Yeah.
No, I in my understanding, let's just club the two
Bring it
together and
together.
then
Okay,
Yeah,
fine.
because they are like similar in some
Similar.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what it is.
Cool, then.
There's just one comment I wanted to make. I mean, what the reading talk for me, the takeaway was that in a way the science is not free from prejudices, which we earlier assumed. At least in schools, we thought it's objective, it's value neutral, it has to be sacrosanct, free from social biases. We see that how use of metaphors can be problematic. Any sort of metaphors, it just we have to be extra sensitive in terms of which metaphors are used to define which phenomenon. And egg and sperm is just one of the examples which she beautifully covered, how terms which are used for egg and for sperm are inherently power driven, like there's a power difference. And the very idea of creating in a binary, and this is what the second reading is talking about. So why it's covered under the larger theme of feminist critique of knowledge, or feminist critique of science, is through feminist reading we are trying to show or invite you, all of us basically are working on to identify that knowledge production which is driven through scientific processes or which are largely based on objective knowledge production. It's not actually value neutral. And the creation of binary itself, binary का मतलब क्या होता है? जैसे आपने black और white, male, female, ठीक है? Day and night. So all these binaries which we learn inherently right from the school. First class की किताब उठा के देख लो, वो बच्चों को यही पढ़ा रहे हैं, opposites पढ़ा रहे हैं. But all binaries are not at the same level. They are inherently hierarchical. जो opposite बनाए जा रहे हैं उनमें से एक के पास ज़्यादा power है, एक के पास कम power है. So this is one of the critique of knowledge and science particularly. So I'll just shift on to the second reading, which is about 5 sexes, and it's a beautiful reading which talks about, at least for me, it opened up a new way of looking at moving beyond the binaries of male and female. मतलब इनफैक्ट हम लगता है कि हम काफ़ी सेंसिटिव है, हम लोग पढ़ लिया इतना सारा लिटरेचर. इंटरसेक्स एक टर्म बहुत लूजली यूज़ करते थे कि ठीक है, वन इज मेल, वन इज फीमेल, एंड बीच में इंटरसेक्स है, एंड not so much of attention is given what lies between the two. And should we actually be talking in terms of 1, 2, 3, 5? Because what she breaks down, and will do is she's inviting us to look it in terms of a spectrum, not to get talk in terms of binaries, or for that matter even not limit yourself to 5 sexes also. ऐसा नहीं कि उन्होंने इस टॉपिक में हेडिंग उन्होंने यूज़ किया 5 sexes तो हम कल से 5 sexes यूज़ करने लगते हैं, ऐसा नहीं है. She's inviting us कि 5 sexes उसने डिफाइन किया है, but let's move beyond categories. तो 1993 में this was published under the heading the sciences. And so what I'll do in the next half an hour or so, we have half an hour, right? How much time do we have? 20-25 minutes, okay. So the next 20-25 minutes I'll try to pinpoint what for me I thought were the key ideas, and I'll also complement it with few readings. There is a mention of Foucault and the concept of biopower. So we have already covered in previous reading, but I'll try to just revise it because it's very important for our own academic understanding. So it begins with the first on first page. She talks about this Western culture is deeply committed to the idea that there are only 2 sexes. So they are obsessed with the idea of binaries. He, she, इस तरह के binaries आपको सब जगह दिखाई देंगे. And she's inviting कि ये जो conventions हैं, and these are not like value neutral conventions, इनके पीछे एक पूरी history है. And when she traces history, उन्होंने बीच में she has mentioned about that in fact biblical times में भी Adam is mentioned as a hermaphrodite, like and then Plato is also talking about having there are more than 2 sexes were present in the historical times, but it's only during the Victorian era and the emergence of so-called modernity that they have moved towards creating rigid binaries. And how it is done, I mean, she talks about medical field is one. The medical field make sure that whenever a baby is born, they are defined and categorized. 2 तरीके से उसका नाम जो भी लिखा जाएगा registration certificate पे या birth certificate पे, उसको define करना ही है male और female, ठीक है. एंड दिस इज सो आई मीन आफ्टर रीडिंग दिस, जब हम अपने फॉर्म्स वगैरह एनालाइज करेंगे ना, चाहे वो रेलवे का रिजर्वेशन फॉर्म हो या फिर एडमिशन फॉर्म हो, चाहे कुछ भी, अगर वहाँ पे 2 कैटेगरीज हैं, सो दिस मेक्स अस मोर सेंसिटिव अबाउट कि व्हाट अबाउट द अदर जेंडर, व्हाट अबाउट द अदर सेक्सेस, लाइक कितना डिफिकल्ट होता होगा एक बच्चे को इस कैटेगरी में लाई करना, विच प्रोबेबली मेनी ऑफ अस वर इनसेंसिटिव अबाउट. तो इस पूरे आर्टिकल में शी हैज मेंशन्ड अबाउट कि जो मेडिकल ऑब्सेशन है, मेडिकल लीगल सिस्टम वर्क टुगेदर, मेडिकल लीगल सिस्टम वर्क टुगेदर एज इन कि जो बर्थ सर्टिफिकेट बनेगा, उसके बाद वोटर आईडी कार्ड बनेगा, बाकी चीज़ें सब बनेंगी. तो स्टेट जो कि इतना लिबरल स्टेट लगता है, वो इतना लिबरल है नहीं, वो जानबूझ के 2 कैटेगरीज में मेंटेन करके रखना चाहता है. एंड दिस ओपन्स अप द लार्जर डिबेट ऑफ ये 2 कैटेगरीज में रखने की जरूरत क्या है, हु इज बेनिफिटिंग फ्रॉम दिस, who are getting marginalized because of this, who is exercising power and how. Because एक बार वो समझ में आएगा कि प्रॉब्लम ये 2 कैटेगरीज की क्या है, then we can think of probably challenging those power structures. So this is what she opens up. I'll just read 2-3 lines from this. इसमें इन्होंने लिखा हुआ है, this is on page 3, second paragraph, just above the picture. She talks about, but if the state and the legal system have an interest in maintaining the 2-party sexual system, they are in defiance of nature. So this is completely in defiance of nature. Then she picks up the example both from like human species and in fact non-human species. They are existing of multiple sexes, not just binary. So for biologically speaking, there are many gradations running from female to male, and depending upon how one calls the shot, one can argue that along the spectrum lies at least 5 sexes. At least 5 sexes, she mentions, perhaps more. For some time, medical interventions have recognized the concept of intersexual bodies, but the standard medical literature uses the term intersex as a catch for all 3 major subgroups with some mixtures of male-female characteristics, that so-called hermaphrodites, whom I called herms. Some possesses 1 testis and 1 ovary, the sperm and the egg-producing vessels or gonads. The male pseudo-hermaphrodites, which is called merms, and who have testis and some aspects of female genitalia but no ovaries, and the female pseudo-hermaphrodites, which are firms. So these three categories she adds to her earlier understanding of male and female. In fact, after reading this is my understanding and I may be wrong, but more than going into who has how many ovaries, where is your urethra, where is your biological structure, how is it defined, because it's so complicated, which can only be categorized after carrying a full-fledged surgery on the body of a person. So she invites at least that let's not get into defining also these categories, otherwise we are creating the same hierarchies which we are already challenging. So categories banane ki zarurat nahi, but at least let's open up this space for more categories. Now, second part she talks about in the next paragraph, which is that coming to the numbers. I mean, this is also something, if you imagine on the scale, at least she talks about in a research which was done on a group of in a Brown University, 6,000 out of 6,000, on an average there are like 250 intersex on the campus. And then this got me thinking back to our campus, like, okay, so this is not a small number. And this is something which not spoken and not addressed in most of our in conversations also. So this reading is very eye-opening in that sense. Next is in the next paragraph she talks about the recent advances in physiology and surgical technology now enables physicians to catch more intersexuals at the moment of birth. Almost at once such infants are entered into a program of hormonal and surgical management. So what she's talking about, the moment a kid is born, they are just asked to run through a program of fitting into some sort of a normal category. And the assumption, which is very important, the assumption with which medical practitioners are operating, मतलब उनके intentions pure in the sense they are thinking that we are doing good to you. हम लोग fit कर रहे हैं category में so that we make your life easy. So and this is what Foucault will talk about biopolitics में कि इस तरह से operate करेगा power and liberal state इस तरह से operate करेगा, वो बोलेगा कि education system ऐसा है, आपके भले के लिए education system है. We are disciplining you for your good because otherwise there will be anarchy. So there is a lot of resemblance about how the medical fraternity is operating in order to do you good. And then she counters it beautifully with the example of a story of Emma. In the next page, she talks about how some people, at least whom the case study is about, that how she has lived her life as a hermaphrodite without even having a problem, because she has both the male organ and the female organ. She is having pleasurable sex with girlfriends also, and she is married to a man with the sex which is not very so much of pleasure, but at least this is how you can actually live a normal life. What in fact, who are we to define what is normal life? But it's still possible. And then before I talk about Foucault's role here, then in the end she imagines a world of multiple sexualities, multiple identities. The term she uses is multiplicity. Yeah, sexual multiplicity. What is sexual multiplicity? She is imagining a world beyond binaries, where the same knowledge, जो medical knowledge है हमारे पास, जो हमारी scientific knowledge है, अगर उसको हम लगाएं, इस चीज़ में इन्वेस्ट करें कि जहाँ पे सेक्शुअल मल्टीप्लिसिटीज आर क्रिएटेड, मतलब हमारी साइंस की नॉलेज rather than putting it in terms of कि हम उनके हार्मोनल चेंजेस और उस पर सर्जरी करके उनको बॉक्स करें कैटेगरी में, उस साइंस को, उस नॉलेज को हम इसमें यूज़ करें कि जो मल्टीपल सेक्सुअलिटीज़ हैं, मल्टीपल आइडेंटिटीज़ हैं, उनके अगर उनको कोई मेडिकल प्रॉब्लम्स हो रही है तो उस चीज़ को एड्रेस करो इन ऑर्डर टू लेट देम सर्वाइव, लेट देम गिव स्पेस एंड लेट देम बी अ मोर सेंसिटिव वर्ल्ड. तो दिस इज व्हाट शी इज इनवाइटिंग अस to think upon. And then I'll read this part which is on the page number 6, almost in the last page, last page, and this is important. Second paragraph. The treatment of intersexuality in the century provides a clear example of what the French historian Michel Foucault called the biopower. The knowledge developed in biochemistry, embryology, endocrinology, psychology, and surgery in order to sum it up together, the modern scientific knowledge has enabled physicians to control the very sex of the human body. The multiple contradictions in that kind of power call for more scrutiny. So the modern knowledge is in fact, which they claim is for your good, in fact used to control the same sexes. The multiple contradictions in that kind of power calls for more scrutiny. On the other hand, the medical management of the intersexuality certain developed as a part of the attempt to free people from the perceived psychological pain. So they are operating with the principle कि हम लोग तो आपकी भलाई के लिए कर रहे हैं, आपको psychological pain जो होने वाला है ना, just because you are not falling into the category, so we are doing it with that intention. Now, and if one accepts the assumption that in a sex-divided culture, people can realize the greatest potential for happiness and productivity only if they are sure they belong to one of the two acknowledged sexes, modern medicine has been extremely successful. I mean, this is sarcasm hidden there. Like, if you really think that we are working to create more happiness, and that's where modern medicine and modern knowledge have been very, very successful. On the other hand, the same medical accomplishment can be read not as a progress but as a mode of discipline. Hermaphrodites have unruly bodies. They do not fall naturally into the binary classifications. Only a surgical shoehorn can put them there. But why should we care if women defined as one has breast or vagina or uterus, ovaries, who menstruate, who has clitoris large enough to penetrate the vagina? So what she's talking about is कि हमें फर्क क्यों पड़ता है कि कौन किसकी बॉडी कैसी है, कितनी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज हैं उसमें, और उसका इंटरेक्शन, उनकी सेक्सुअल लाइफ, how are they having sex? Why is it even a concern for a state? Like, why should this be a concern on which state and medical fraternity should be thinking about? Now the answer seems to lie in the cultural need to maintain clear distinction. Coming to the earlier point, so why is culture so obsessed? And culture is a very macro term. उसमें language, religion, सारी चीज़ हमारे belief system भी आएगा. So why are they maintaining this clear distinction between the sexes? Society mandates the control of intersexual bodies because they blur the bridge of the great divide. So intersex kind of literally blurs the bridge between the two categories of men and women, so to say. In so much as hermaphrodites literally embody both sexes, they challenge the traditional belief from the sexual differences they possess, the ability to live sometimes on one sex and sometimes on the other, and they raises the spectra of heterosexuality. तो they challenge the heterosexuality matrix and इस पे अगर थोड़ा डिस्कशन किया जाए, सोचा जाए तो कौन कौन से हमारे ऐसे स्ट्रक्चर्स हैं जिनको फायदा होता है हेट्रोनॉर्मेटिव बाइनरी सिस्टम को मेंटेन करने से. वन आई कुड थिंक ऑफ ऑन द टॉप ऑफ माय हेड वाज रिलीजन, बिकॉज हमारे यहाँ की शादियाँ ही इस तरह से डिफाइंड है कि आदमी और औरत में ही शादी होगी, ठीक है. सेक्स इस तरह से डिफाइंड है कि मेल और फीमेल के बीच में सेक्स होगा, अदरवाइज लीगली बहुत टाइम तक इट वाज कंसिडर्ड इलीगल. सो that's what, and we can have more discussion. I'll just wrap it up with the last part, which is about the biopower, just revising what Foucault had talked about earlier, which is in the book of History of Sexuality. Biopower has become a term and which is a term which is used for scholars of gender, sexuality, race, colonialism and imperialism. And the concept of biopower gives us the tool. So it's a tool to connect the body, which is a site of feminist interest. So एक side पे body है, and on the other hand it is the disciplining power of scientific, medical, legal, statistical and aesthetical knowledge, while also building a critique of the internal bureaucratic functioning of the liberal state. So my understanding here is what Foucault is talking about. एक तरफ body के बीच का जो connection है, body को is trying to connect with the structures of power, which inherently comes with knowledge, which is where the role of legal system, your medical system is there. At the same time, role of state. So there are three parties involved here. और state, liberal state जो हमारी एक understanding होती है political science में कि liberal state है, rights देता है हमको, fundamental, human rights liberal state provide करता है, UN का पूरा charter है उस पे. तो liberal state अपने आप में उतना liberal नहीं है because it's working in tandem with those power structures. तो वहाँ पे body के ऊपर कैसे operate करता है. The theory of biopower is also a specific elaboration of the relationship that Foucault calls power knowledge, a term that describes how power is made and circulated through accepted forms of knowledge, methods including scientific understanding and forms of empirical truth. The theory of biopower allows scholars to analyze how power is diffused and connect with multiple scales, from the penetration of power into more intimate cells. So which is where he's talking that even our understanding of power, इससे पहले ये थी कि power is associated with state, it's associated with sovereignty, but he just takes it further into a personal life in terms of sexuality and the relationship between the power and the pleasure. इसके बाद he talks of first Foucault's general theory of biopower encapsulate two central positions. तो उनको further दो part में he is dividing. One is the first argues the nature of political power fundamentally changing during the historical shift from the European monarchies to European liberal nation state. तो ये थोड़ा सा political understanding है कि हमारी the way we have moved from medieval to modern times. So पहले जो European monarchy system था, अभी democratic state structure है, तो we call it modern because we think we have moved from पहले सर काट देते थे सजा देने पे, पत्थरों से मारा जाता था, अभी जो है स्टेट कितना लिबरल है, राइट्स देता है. So this is more modern way of looking at things, but Foucault is actually questioning that by saying that across the Enlightenment, however, the political power shifted from monarchy to more diffuse network of penal, medical and educational institutions. अब जो है वो पावर उतनी रॉ दिखाई नहीं देगी. पहले किसी को फांसी पे चढ़ा दो और उसको बीच में लटका दो तो रिवोल्ट हो जाता था, रेवोल्यूशंस हो जाते थे. इनफैक्ट फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन स्टार्टेड विद सम ऑफ दिस. इस तरह से जिलेटिन के बाद उन्होंने द फॉल ऑफ बैस्टिल वाज दैट, क्योंकि देवर रिएक्शन, पीपल कुड सी द वायलेंस. अभी क्या है, वही वायलेंस, वही पावर, वो इतना हिडन है कि वो प्रिजन के अंदर होगा, वो दिखाई नहीं देगा. ठीक है, वो मेडिकल लैबोरेटरीज में होगा, प्रोबेबली स्कूल्स के अंदर जो पावर का एक्सरसाइज होगा स्टेट के थ्रू, तो वो इतना लिबरल फॉर्म दे कि वो आपको दिखाई देना बंद हो गया है या फिर कम दिखाई देता. दैट्स व्हाट ही इज मेकिंग अस मोर सेंसिटिव टुवर्ड्स. एंड with this he argues that the political power has first exemplified in the king's right to mete out death as a negative force. You might think of command off the head, which is now not there. Across the Enlightenment, however, the political power shifted, and which is now it exerts power positively. So now this is what is called as positively exercise of power by seeking to either maximize or rehabilitate life. The argument which is given by the state is कि हम तो rehabilitate कर रहे हैं, हम तो maximize कर रहे हैं आपकी happiness. Think here of the educational, parental, including parental institutions, the state or medical injections. It is only for your own good. This is what the first term is, which is for your own good. In Foucault's narrative, this diffused network changed the nature of power from a negative force to a positive one by working productively to create ideal and non-ideal subjectivity as a disciplinary form. Here you might think of how particular gender formations of identity are rewarded with more social status, heterosexuality over bisexuality, or cis people over trans and non-binary gender than others. This exercise of power at the level of individual in what Foucault refers to as anatomopolitics. So अभी तक just to sum it up, बायोपावर में एक तरफ उन्होंने अभी तक एक चीज़ हमने कवर की, which is how Foucault is showing us कि state का रोल उतना लिबरल नहीं है. उसमें भी किस तरह से सेक्सुअलिटी जिसे डिवाइड की जा रही है, जो बाइनरीज बना रहे हैं, स्टेट बना रहा है विद लीगल सिस्टम, उसमें भी दिस इज हाउ कुछ आइडेंटिटी आर गिवन मोर प्रिविलेज देन अदर्स आर मार्जिनलाइज्ड, and this is what he calls as anatomy politics, because this is directly related to the anatomy of a person. The second part of the biopower, and this is the last part, which is called the biopolitics, on what he describes as the penetration and the elaboration of these productive forms of power into the nooks and the granaries of the biological life of the population. Often this later term came to stand in the whole of biopower. So second part जो है जिसमें कि power is now penetrated into the individual's life through the state. This penetration of power which he talks about is these words are not chosen casually. Foucault was very interested in how power is also an erotic form, arguing with the organizations of biopower, pleasure and power function as a mechanism with the double impetus. And this is one of the favorite lines which he talks about कि कितना मजा आता है state को how is state exercising power by first creating the binaries and then regulating it. तो पहले you are creating the problem and then you are coming as like हम लोग तो solutions कर रहे हैं आपके लिए, and उस power structure से बचने में, and the people who are trying to fight that power structure are also exercising power. मतलब this is, I'll just read it. The pleasure that comes of exercising a power that questions, monitors, watches, spies, searches out, palpates, bring to the light, and on the other hand the pleasure that kindles at having to evade this power, flee from it, fool it, or travesty it. These attractions, these evasions, these circular incitements having traced around bodies and sexes, not boundaries, not to be crossed, but perpetual spiral of power and pleasure. So this perpetual spiral of power and pleasure, which is what Foucault is talking about, and this is created through our categorization, which is done through senses, through other categorization. So the biopower then is a form of power that is sexual in and itself, because it is highly surveillant in nature. So biopower is highly surveillant in nature. It peeks and seeks out. At the level of individual, biopower is invested in watching, categorizing, and thus producing typologies of sexes and sexuality, and then chasing them as erotic objects of interest and often criminalizing them. So it's the state पहले categorize करते हैं, फिर criminalize करते हैं, and then this is what Foucault is talking about biopolitics and biopower, which is where this intersexual reading से connected, because intersex बनाया है, दो category पहले बनाई तो state नहीं बनाई, starting में पैदा होते ही उसका registration certificate से लेके voter ID, ration card सब जगह आपको apply करना पड़ेगा. And की starting की reading में she is given a case study where a person was not able to exercise the vote to her right to vote because decide नहीं हो पा रहा था कि male है कि female है. So I think yeah, with this we have come towards the end of the reading. I think if you have any comments, you can share. The floor is open. Just coming back, who benefits from these structures of heteronormative structures? Like ये दो binaries से फायदा किसका होता है? And why is it sustained, created?
Very broad question. मतलब एक बार में I don't think we gradually reach there. We know, we see the state, the structures, society in general, and how to evolve.
maybe binary में जो जो binaries create होती हैं उसमें जो dominant है उसका फायदा हो रहा है.
ये तो है, अगर दो binaries बना रहे हैं, and the important तुमने भी cover किया था, the part which is like how language is a tool to create binaries. हम बच्चों को सिखाते इंग्लिश में ये रहे ना कि ये ब्लैक है वाइट है, ये ऑब्जेक्ट है ये सब्जेक्ट है, ये मतलब एक ह्यूमन है एक नॉन ह्यूमन है. अगर एनिमल और ह्यूमन में कैटेगराइज कर रहे हैं तो हम बता रहे हैं कि ठीक है एक के पास पावर है वो दूसरे को एक्सट्रैक्ट कर सकता है अपने फायदे के लिए, उसको यूज कर सकता है. लाइक यू सेड द बाइनरीज में देयर इज वन who is exercising the power is trying to maintain it. Language is power.
Also we can link capitalism with this binary. क्योंकि मतलब कि लेबर फोर्स क्रिएट करना है और वुमेन को प्राइवेट डोमेन में रख रहे हैं क्योंकि वो फ्यूचर लेबर्स को प्रोड्यूस कर सकें. So, और जो प्रॉपर्टी ओनिंग क्लास है उसमें भी मोस्ट ऑफ देम मेन ही हैं. तो अल्टीमेटली दैट सेम पॉइंट है एक क्लास का सॉरी वन कैटेगरी बेनिफिट कर रहा है.
And this is again connecting it back to the reading. Anne is also talking about कि state जो है it's not just voter ID or registration. Property rights भी तो देने बाद में. Property rights it's also connected with that same point कि इसीलिए binary maintain करना.
Another thing while I was thinking of, and it's very directly related to the Fausto-Sterling reading, is like how she said that sex, how we understand, is actually in a spectrum. It's beyond obviously male and female, and even the ones that she mentions. Is I think we've discussed it multiple times here. सबको पता है is the debate around this women in sports and how they are considered if they qualify as woman, as a female body or a male body, somewhere in between. उसमें भी I felt like even following the debates, obviously feminists criticize it and all, and of course trans bodies का भी सवाल आता है, but we have to मतलब pinpoint. There's not much of a question around intersex bodies. This whatever women will be questioned when like if they are going to qualify to run for the women's race. Now that we read it, we know like there's so many levels of how you understand sex. Where do they fall, and even if they do fall in it, what's the place for intersex people? Is there a particular definition for it? Like I don't know. And also the way how इसमें जो categorization Fausto-Sterling ने डाला है, yeah, that's one way of doing it. But ये debates में भी जैसे हमें पता चलता है, there's so many structures going inside our bodies, so many things. You cannot even name and pinpoint to each and every structure. Like there is also huge role played by hormones, which जो बात आता है ये सब debates में when it's questioned that who can run in which race. कि it's not just the genitalia. इसमें the genitalia is used कि someone has one testis, one ovary, both, neither, ऐसा करके. There's also like someone with both the genitalia of all women, all female, could have hormones which have more male hormones. That person would have a very different kind of body, different kind of power, different kind of power as in like say just physical power I'm talking about that needs to be run in a race. इसमें so उसमें बहुत सारा दिक्कत आ जाता है. So this questions like it's an ongoing questioning procedure. I don't know what's the solution right now because obviously ऐसा तो नहीं होता है कि there's this race for intersex people. उसमें भी कैसे बोलोगे like how उसमें भी categorization at the end of the day we have to fall back into categorization because the way the society is designed there's actually not so easy way out of it. But yeah, but I thought it's very important to bring in this debate of which bodies can qualify for which gender race.
In fact, the division of मतलब अभी साइंस के बारे में हमने पढ़ा कि साइंस इतना नाइव और इमेजिनेटिव नहीं है. तो ये टेस्टोस्टेरोन और ये प्रोजेस्टेरोन मतलब ये भी हमने डिफाइन कर ना कि ये मेल ही हार्मोन है, जबकि ऐसे स्ट्रिक्ट डिवीजन तो है नहीं. बॉडी में दोनों ही होते हैं, ठीक है, कम ज़्यादा विद टाइम और विद अलग स्टेजेस में चेंज होता रहता है. तो साइंस ने ऐसे बना दिया है.
Yeah, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think this basic categories जो define की गई हैं, so we have to criticize them firstly. What was the criteria to actually categorize the feminine quality क्या होती है, feminine hormones क्या होते हैं? So because again, otherwise we'll fall into categories and categories if we are going to find the solution.
Any other debate you can think of that you can bring in?
Yeah, he has a point.
A recently retired professor from CSSS, Susan Vishwanathan, she in one of her article from housewifeization to I think androgyny, yeah. So she talks about Tamil fisher women who brings into forefront both the manly and womanly characteristics at different points of time in order to deal with the everyday life struggle. So, everyday life struggle in her life. So, I mean, this can also be connected to the current notion of sologamy, where individuals think that, you know, they are self-sufficient in themselves. They don't need any other person or person of opposite sex to continue their lives. So, there can be two debates, one on the basis of social attributes and another the biological one which we were discussing.
To answer your hard point, concepts are always going to be partial. When you conceptualize, you bring out the selective aspect of reality and you conceptualize around it. And now, how do you conceptualize? You use language. And language has a tendency to be linear in age. Linear in the sense that, for example, right now I have multiple thoughts in my brain, but I can speak through time and space. We all share the space. Every second I am speaking, and this is a linear moment of time. Language is linearly moving. Even when you write, you can't write mumbo jumbo. It won't make sense. You write in a line. It has a linear sense. So concepts, when defined, would be partial and linear linguistically when you are writing it. So concepts will always be linear. So concepts will always be criticized because they are partial view of the reality. The reality in a comprehensive is just a chaos in a way. Sorry to use the word, it's a very dramatic word, but reality is comprehensive capturing of reality is not conceptually possible. Comprehensively you cannot capture the reality. So concepts will always be criticized, but we as academics, you said who benefits? One of the beneficial parties are academics. I keep mentioning this, I mentioned that last time. I'm not trying to demoralize the industry. It is a good industry. To make bread and butter out. My point is, it's a simple request to understand the kind of gravity of what we are dealing with. We deal with classifications. In PhD, I am taught conceptually social, think through concepts. So we are thinking through concepts from alienation of Marx to biopower of Foucault to power and knowledge. We are thinking in that. So it's a very fantastic world, ideological or ideal in a way, and you are thinking through that. Reality ka reflection we are trying to bring in concepts, and it keeps evolving, it keeps getting better. But I think academia has a limited role in a way that you can keep classifying, conceptualizing, and then you involve money and capitalism into it and it becomes a very, brutal, bad, stupid industry in the sense that you will always classify in terms of the money interest. Right? So Foucault talks about it, Marx has also talked about it, Engels has also, I remember the origins of the private property. He has also mentioned something like that in this, how division of labor happened and all this. But concepts को तो criticize कर सकते हैं, but I mean when you bring in money, when you bring in concepts, when you bring in academia as a world, living in a modern capitalist world, it makes for such a dangerous nexus. To come out of it is just, it's very difficult. So this is pretty much the death call that I'm
I think that's what Anne is talking about. Like, just because concepts and language is linear, it is also on our responsibility to use that language in a certain way. So we can evolve new inclusive terms. He or she she has moved towards 5 categories. So probably that opens up more space. So use the language ही करनी है, but it's on us, on academicians, how we use, which terms are we picking up, कौन सा हम छोड़ रहे हैं. अगर वेस्टर्न इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज में नहीं है तो आगे लुकिंग इनटू ट्रेडिशनल लैंग्वेजेस कि कहीं से हमें और ऐसी टर्म्स मिल जाए.
Anything about the first reading? What do you have in mind? What were you thinking when listening to a reading? What do you find amusing?
I just made a connection between these two readings. So I understand. The first reading, the egg and the sperm, is within a heteronormative world. Right? That's a heteronormative, taking that framework. Within that, language and how language and culture shape the language of the sciences, of the biology in particular. But in this case, again, language could be used. In the article that you shared, language is the rehabilitating thing. Cultural homogenization and the imposition of cultural categories into language. But in his article, it's the opposite.
Yeah.
And what is the liberating point? This is what you are also trying to say. Language could be liberating, but I mean, yeah, and she opens up the debate into this is just not five. There are so many.
Yeah.
That is a
She gives hope with the way
Yeah.
she ends up with multiplicities.
capitalists would make industry out of hope as well.
Yeah, that's the point. So, yeah. Anything else? How can we move the debate forward?
In fact, in education, silence makes me awkward. It puts me under pressure, say something. No, just kidding. So, उसमें एक इन्होंने प्रॉब्लम हुई बताई थी कि हम अपने बच्चों को कैसे ग्रो करेंगे ना, लाइक ग्रो करने से लाइक उनकी कैसे अपब्रिंगिंग होगी, तो द बिगेस्ट प्रेशर विल बी ऑन अ फैमिली जिसमें अगर कोई इंटरसेक्स पैदा होता है एंड देन दे वांट टू यू नो गो अहेड विद दैट. हमारे यहाँ तो क्या होता है कि उनको दे देते हैं अक्सर, जितना मुझे पता है कि है ना, दे आर नॉट कि हाँ या तो सर्जरी कराएंगे तो दे देंगे, तो इट्स अ बिग चैलेंज फॉर समवन टू डू दैट. कितनी प्रॉब्लम्स आती हैं, लाइक शी मेंशन्स अबाउट कि स्कूल में वॉशरूम में लेके जिम से लेके जाने से लेके आप हर स्टेज पे प्रॉब्लम. We have no idea how it goes. Like I'm not speaking from an experience, but kitna hota hoga, no idea. I can answer.
I think for that I remember the reading that I did. It's
Yeah.
very limited understanding. We are talking about a book on Hijra lives and
हम तो
how
बहुत
they
ही
break.
theoretical बात
Because it said that they did it, so that's what usually happens when a Hijra community, like we said in that class also, is not just intersex people, so it would be wrong to confuse it. But one part of it, people who are born intersex, the Hijras take them away and they're given away, and then they're brought in a different community in a different way, mostly outside the typical structures that carries binaries. But ऐसा भी होता है, the place that जिसके ऊपर रिसर्च होके वो बुक लिखा था, Hijras, Lovers and Brothers, that we did, there are also certain Hijras who were living with their families, so they were accepted in a way, but they're also being exploited in a way because they're allowed to stay there because they brought in money. ये सब complexities तो रहेगा. So if you ask the question of what was the role of the family in bring up an intersex child, there's no easy answer to it.
So they were like very open that they performed the sex work,
Yeah.
which is not there in case of other genders.
Yeah, that's
But because
that's
just because of the fact that they brought money.
That's an interesting concept. It would probably be very different if it was a typical female who did sex work. तब उनको रहने नहीं देते घर में. That is also like how to explain.
In your article, there is another really important point that we were discussing last time. In that particular line, that whether we are going stereotypical, so first the female was damsel in distress, then became the dangerous aggressor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So at one end of the binary, and not binary in the spectrum of behavior, as a damsel in distress, to the other extreme, which is
Yeah.
dangerous aggressor. So the problem is not moving in the stereotypes from one to the other. The problem is much larger in the sense, why do you have to represent that? Why do you have to think?
Yeah. Why do you have to give that meaning?
Transpose? Why do you have to give import your understanding of male and female culture and
Exactly.
understanding on the gametes or the
Yeah,
sperm?
वही ना, giving
Right.
personhood to them.
Person,
So it's a
giving
very
an
necessary you have to
identity.
give like
So,
हाँ.
this is always a
Yeah.
problem. When
Yeah,
we
yeah.
represent,
Yeah.
and we were also discussing that how we represent those
Fetus.
we were discussing plant sexuality, plant reproduction.
You're saying, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how I remember the name, it was Linnaeus. Linnaeus categorization of plant biology, and he discusses that, how we transpose that. So this is again a big philosophical question of transposition. For example, I was reading an article by Eduardo Kohn, he is an anthropologist. So he was talking about how dogs breed. So in the upper Amazonian forest in Brazil, there is a tribe called Runa. Runa thinks that dogs dream, and every time they dream and they bark in the dream, actually barking in the sleep, it means that they are thinking of their getting killed. So they don't let the dog go out in the jungle next day because they have been dreamed about their killing.
Oh.
But one incident happened that one dog got into the forest and got killed, but he didn't get any dreams last night. So this was a peculiar case, and then this anthropologist studies how Luna understood this. So dogs actually dream, and dream not in the sense that human beings dream. It's in a dog's sense of dream. What could be dog's sense of dream? So anthropologists also study that you need not impose your human thought on the substance or subject or any other animal. Some tribal or some ethnic groups have their understanding, not their own, but the way they think, the animals think. So it's called multi-species understanding. It's very difficult actually. But yeah, it raises the point as to how we, from cell to molecule to tissue to atom and everything that comes, we try to interpret it in our own terms. Because otherwise, I don't think we'll be able to make sense.
That is also, we also have a
How do you make
reputation.
sense of the world?
Certain ways,
This is exactly what Bacon's understanding. No, like you have to. Nature is chaotic. It's just only by human, and later feminists will criticize that it's not human, it's actually male. So how is male imposing his understanding on nature in order to control it? So to confuse it with human is again but yeah, it's male understanding on nature in order to understand, comprehend, record, and create knowledge. And then what you said, connected with capitalism or
So there has been no such thing as objective science.
Yeah.
There has been masculine science,
Masculine
male
science,
science,
male science.
nothing universal about it.
Yeah.
Just again, I was just thinking. I'm so sorry, I'm just missing it. It's just to suit a particular kind of class of people. Everything objective universality suits a particular kind of class of people. You are talking about experiential realities of major community and all. It doesn't suit them. The academic studies doesn't suit them, and their experiential reality is much more chaotic or comprehensive or much more powerful in that moment rather than our reading of it or someone else's understanding of it.
Right, yeah. Like even this masculine idea of how imposing it on, I also think in terms of IR, international relations, like how power is understood there, like this is Multiplicity principles. And basically the realism is mostly power, and the understanding of power is also very masculine. The way he describes, it's generally men who think that way. Like you need to kill to survive. For women's understanding of power, so when feminists come and critique that, they critique that this is not how power is. And there was maybe in Kanamata, who is it, this Hannah Arendt, she describes power very differently. For her, a woman's idea of power is acting in concert.
Collaborative.
Yes. For a man's idea of power is imposing, controlling. So obviously it is, of course, the concept we have right now is maybe so we can apply that, like you said, we are making sense of the world through how we think. This is because it's been primarily men who think that way. They made sense of the world that way, and Abhi, because they are the ones in actual power, this is becoming normalized. Only recently when have got
The concept of war also, like why men go to war is because they do not have like physical intimacy also. For them it is about with the women, or otherwise there is a concept like why men go to war. Like I think some feminist critique of war, we say that because they get to touch men there at the war.
Yeah,
So that is why.
otherwise
That
physical
is their
intimacy
idea of
normalized.
that is the idea of like the interaction. That is their idea of interacting. Men go to war.
Yeah, that's related to another reading also, how it's funny. Like if men could menstruate, we'll do that song. It's very short and it's beautiful. जो है by Gloria Steinem. उसमें भी like you brought in this point. उसमें भी it connects war to like if अभी men go to war and women are not going to war. उसका ये explanation है कि because women are the weaker, have weaker bodies.
Yeah,
They
also
menstruate, which is a practical problem.
concept of egg being a passive one or dominant one.
Yeah.
With that, it's like like now science has discovered that egg also has immunity. Now that egg is not really protecting it, egg is actively killing also the sperm because now egg will choose the sperm. So because it has immunity, so mostly if the eggs are killed, they are not killed only because they are dying. It is also because the egg is actively killing them with the immunity. So that is also like
Which
So
one?
basically aggressive.
हाँ exactly but वही ना लोगों को समझ में दिक्कत हो जाएगा like that
और वहाँ पे survival of the fittest नहीं आया.
हाँ
Egg can choose which sperm do I want to fuse with.
yeah
Or the egg, if it's a human thing, maybe imagine the way they are in
yeah
transposing the
person
thought.
अगर दे दे
तो egg तो अपना survival of the fittest देख रहा है. I want the fittest sperm for myself. तो वहाँ पे ये लोग use नहीं करेंगे इस argument को because
right.
this goes against their logic.
yeah exactly
Right? Funny है.
हाँ सच में वही ना that's it just points out very directly so yeah like I was saying in that reading also so it says that if men were the ones menstruating they would go to war and they'd justify that because they bleed and they are so used to seeing blood only they have the right to go and shed blood as well opposite logic is as well so like
Glorify it.
हाँ
There will be rituals for that.
is it something but it's funny of course how these things get anything to add
There's this one article by Donna Haraway. It's about some critique of objective knowledge
Yes.
and all. So that she said about something like whenever we do this objective study, तो जब भी knowledge में हम objective study को prioritize करते हैं, and then most of these are like looking at something from bird's eye view. So what happens that जब कुछ डिफरेंट और या कुछ ऑब्जेक्टिविटी से मतलब जो मोस्टली जो या सो सपोज लेट्स अज्यूम द डेटा कलेक्शन ओके सो डेटा कलेक्शन में क्या होता है कि लोग ऐसा नहीं है कि सब्जेक्टिव पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से नहीं देखते उनको जो लगता है कि हाँ ये चीज़ें हैं जो सिमिलर हैं इस कैटेगरी में एंड ऐसे करके वो सब एनालाइज करते हैं तो उसमें अगर कुछ डिफरेंट होता है ना तो उसको एक्सेप्शन मान लिया जाता है सो इफ़ आई एनालाइज और इट्स लाइक अगर इसको ऐसे रिलेट करें हेटेरोसेक्सुअलिटी और होमोसेक्सुअलिटी को कैसे होमोसेक्सुअलिटी को एक्सेप्शन मान लिया गया था मेडिकल स्पेशली मेडिकल टेक्स्ट बुक्स में सो ऐसा था कि अभी आफ्टर दिस 370 नो ये मेडिकल टेक्स्ट बुक्स रिवाइज हो रहे हैं सो दे हैव केप्ट एवरीथिंग ऑन होल्ड कि अभी हम होमोसेक्सुअलिटी के बारे में कुछ पढ़ाएंगे नहीं बिकॉज अभी वी हैव सो मेनी थिंग्स टू रिवाइज सो आई मीन दैट डोना हारावे का इज वेरी थोड़ा कॉम्प्लिकेटेड है वो आर्टिकल बट इट्स ब्यूटीफुल कि कैसे नॉलेज को क्रिटिसाइज किया है उसने फेमिनिस्ट पर्सपेक्टिव से
Do that next.
we think you
Yeah, thank you. But today we were discussing this.
ये वो पापुरी मैम के
हाँ इसके साथ वही वाला था
Out of curiosity, I just wanted to know, does JNU, like as you mentioned on the campuses, so does JNU have any forum or any society of LGBTQ?
yeah Hasrat if you want to join I can give you some contacts I think here's some contacts yeah but इस उस पे भी एक बार मतलब काफी पहले सेशंस में ये हुआ था मतलब it's not functioning that actively right now उसके पहले there was another what was the name of it Dhanak yeah Dhanak was one of the earliest we actually once played a documentary on Dhanak and the earliest founders of Dhanak and it was nice it was good to see the history of it all then मतलब वही people left and there's nobody active for various reasons it kind of खत्म हो गया Hasrat there has been it's also relatively new it's been here for like 3-4 years but wait the thing is it just somehow never manages to survive sadly उसके बहुत सारे reasons है उसमें भी discussion हुआ था एक session में कि why do you think it does not manage to survive like other political parties but if you're talking about it I remember one thing is that obviously because these organizations try to do away with hierarchy and this organizational structure because they are trying to break away of these things obviously but that is also one of the reasons कि the alternative जो है वो नहीं है वो ठीक से function नहीं कर पा रहे all those bigger political parties they function by a hierarchy function by structure these people these alternative organizations are trying to do away with the hierarchy and structures but they also do not know how to do that exactly that's what they're breaking away but there obviously have always been efforts and yeah so it's nice
Remember that story about Rainbow Tree Ayush?
yeah that's one
I heard from here only. I was also
Yeah.
unaware about it.
yeah
What's the story?
yeah Okay. So there. नहीं you go ahead. I think you will better than.
There used to be a rainbow tree somewhere around Ganga Dhaba.
I think that.
And that was painted. That was painted pride. Sabarmati or Ganga?
Tea point was हाँ
And
Sabarmati.
there used to be, अब तो नहीं है.
नहीं काट दिया ना उसको.
2017 I think there used to be a rainbow tree painted pride with pride colors. They cut it. One day they came and they cut the whole tree. And there were protests, but again, no one did anything. So yeah, this campus had the legacy, but
And it was done in the night time.
Yeah.
And after this incident, the people painted the whole campus. And
या उसी टाइम में if you see अभी लाइब्रेरी के सामने जो टेरेस है ना अभी थोड़ा ये हो गया है तो ये back in 2017 and 18 it was quite bright so they painted it rainbow way. So interesting things have always happened in campus. Feel knowledge of some story.
Opposite of it, like I was in Hindu college, there was this virgin tree.
yeah.
Oh my God, really?
it's a highly famous
Okay,
tree.
completely opposite.
What like men want to marry it?
So it is on Valentine's Day. So basically what happens is कि उस दिन this is पता नहीं कहाँ से आया origin. So they condoms के जो balloons होते हैं वो पेड़ पे ऐसे लगा देते थे. And they used to मतलब किसी भी actress जो उस टाइम पे बहुत famous है उसका poster लगा के वहाँ पे ट्री पे and they मतलब pray करते हैं जितने भी boys girls everyone और जिस पे वो condom का balloon गिरेगा वो he will be virgin within मतलब उतने period of ऐसे करके बहुत stupid concept and there was आरती मतलब I'm forgetting the name पता नहीं क्या था कुछ देवी करके कुछ आरती थी तो पूरा मतलब women का जो body होता है उसको पूरा ऐसे describe करके कि इतना inches and something like that. It was very मतलब like I was in second year I guess तो वहाँ पे like all this organizations and this parties बहुत protest हुआ है सब कुछ हुआ है but okay so इसका alternative उन्होंने निकाला कि no मतलब उसका love has no gender फिर उन्होंने couple का photo लगाना start कर दिया so they that उसी time पे रणवीर सिंह and दीपिका पादुकोण की शादी हुई तो उन्होंने वो लगा दिया.
I think this was done by the hostlers.
Hostlers, boys
Hindu
hostlers.
college, हाँ, boys.
We can guess what is going to be the next poster. Vicky Kati.
Oh नहीं अभी
No,
वो
recent
पुराना हो गया.
था.
You're not
आलिया
updated enough.
See, I am outdated in that knowledge.
But quite interesting.
Like, it is completely opposite when you mention कि like 7 colors like rainbow का है वहाँ पे बिल्कुल opposite concept है.
So like few days ago, I received a very beautiful packet of sweets from one of my like extended family, and it was an invitation. The girl child was born, and it was an invitation for Namkaran Sanskar. So I was very happy that they're celebrating it. But on the other hand, it was pink in color, and inside the invitation there were images of Cinderella and
Oh
all
my
these
God.
gender notions. So it was a very ambivalent feeling for me. Ki, at this point, how should we react?
Yeah,
Or how
yeah.
should we feel?
A constant dilemma for researchers.
Also, does anyone is anyone from Chandrabhaga? किसी ने बारात क्या था बोराक वाला हॉस्टल देखा है? उसमें प्रॉपर ब्लू पिंक नहीं है बट आप अगर देखोगे अभी उसको पेंट कराया गया है और ऐसे एक थोड़ा सा ब्लूइश है और इस थोड़ा सा पिंकिश है प्रॉपर नहीं है ऐसे मतलब इट्स एविडेंट नहीं है बट वन कैन गेट कि हाँ ये क्या हो रहा है यहाँ पे इस साइड में बॉयज रहने वाले हैं इसमें गर्ल्स कभी उस साइड जाओगे तो देख लेना.
People were saying that they will have separate mess.
Why?
They have designed 2 separate mess for 2 buildings.
Maybe we don't know. Maybe girls boys एक ही साइड रहेंगे उनका अलग है. So it's a big hostel.
हाँ इट्स ए बिग कैपेसिटी बहुत ज़्यादा.
Why would they segregate? Changing में allowed to हो पता नहीं क्या है. But I'm reminded of again Congress's campaign in UP this time. लड़की मुंह लड़ सकती. The whole poster was pink. So I met a guy. He's very funny. SL का लड़का है. So he went to an NSUI guy and asked him. भैया ये पिंक क्यों किया है? So that guy is the NSC leader. He says that अरे हम लोग लड़कियों के लिए कुछ करना चाह रहे हैं, हम लोग ऊपर लाना चाह रहे हैं. तो वो लड़का थोड़ा शार्प है, sarcastically. वो कहता है कि जब तक वो रहेगा कि उन लोग को ऊपर लाना है तब तक ऊपर नहीं आ पाएंगे. Because the stop assuming that if pink आप कर देंगे तो it's making you a liberal color. It informs everything that we do. Politics, personal invitations.
Kinder Joy blue or pink.
Yes.
Imagine Kinder Joy.
Yes.
उसकी भी अलग अलग पैकेज.
Just beginning. Any more discussions?
Suggestions for next week readings if you have.
Yeah.
Or we're thinking of having a movie screening, so you can suggest any movie also.
Acha, which one do you prefer? Do you prefer movie screening or do you prefer more academic discussions?
There can be a combination of both.
Yeah.
Like after a movie we can have
Yeah, that is right. Sure, documentary like that. Yeah. Okay, we'll figure that out. And if anyone of you want to present, you can. Then the reading of your choice. You are welcome to. Then we can wrap up.